You could have broken my neck and you're not even going to say sorry properly? He turned around slowly, one earbud still in, like she was the one interrupting his morning. I said my bad. That's not an apology. That's what you say when you step on someone's shoe. He looked at her for a second too long, amused, unbothered, already jogging backward down the hallway. Noted, I'll write you a formal one. Don't bother, she called after him. Hello, my amazing story lovers. Welcome back. Before we keep going, if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And if you've got a guess about where this story is headed, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Okay, back to Ashley. She was a senior, music composition major, minoring in accounting because her mother had said the words, "You need something practical," so many times that Ashley had stopped arguing and just registered for the classes. She worked mornings at the campus cafe on Belmont Street, gave piano lessons on Thursdays to a 9-year-old named Grace who lived 2 blocks from her apartment, and shared a 2-bedroom with Crystal Pierce, her roommate since freshman orientation, the kind of friend who said exactly what she thought and expected the same in return. What Crystal didn't know, what nobody on this campus knew, was why Ashley kept people at a careful, measured distance. Why she didn't date. Why she flinched, just barely, when someone came up behind her too fast. She'd built a whole personality around being fine. Funny, sharp, dependable, fine. By February, she was retaking intro macroeconomics, not because she needed it, but because a scheduling conflict from the fall had knocked the credit off her transcript, and she needed proof on paper that she'd actually earned it. She sat near the back, took notes out of habit, barely looked up. Someone sat down next to her on the second week. She smelled cold air and cologne before she saw his face. "You," he said, grinning like they were old friends. "Small world." "It's a medium-sized university," she said, not looking up from her notebook. "Not that small." "Yoon Jae-hyun," he said, holding out a hand she didn't take. "I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are. Is that a compliment?" "It's a fact." He laughed under his breath and let it go, and for the rest of the lecture he didn't say another word to her, which she appreciated more than she let on. Midterms posted 3 weeks later. The professor had this habit of putting the top score on the portal without a name attached, just a percentage, but everyone on this campus had a way of finding out these things eventually. Ashley's score was the highest in the class. Jaehyun's was one of the lowest, low enough that his eligibility status turned into a real conversation instead of a rumor. He found her at the cafe on a Tuesday, sliding onto the stool across the counter from her like he'd been planning the conversation the whole walk over. "I need a tutor," he said. "Okay, I need you." She wiped down the counter without looking at him. "I'm not a tutor. You got the highest grade in the class. That doesn't make me a tutoring service. That makes me someone who studies. I'll pay you. I don't want your money. Then what do you want?" She looked up at that, actually looked at him, and something in his face was different than the hallway version of him. Less performance, more desperate than he wanted to admit. "I want you to leave me alone," she said, and went back to wiping the counter. He didn't leave her alone. He showed up the next day, and the day after. Sat at the corner table with his laptop and his textbook, doing his reading in plain view of her like he was trying to prove something, never once asking her again, just existing in her peripheral vision until it started to feel less like pressure and more like a fact of the room. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks into this quiet standoff, when he finally said the thing that changed everything. "I know who he is," Jaehyun said, not looking up from his notes. "Vincent Parker. Music theory. 3rd row. Always wears his jacket like he's about to get interviewed." Ashley's hands went still on the espresso machine. "Excuse me? You watch him, every class. I've seen you do it for weeks. That's none of your business." "No," he agreed, "but I've got a proposal, if you're interested. You help me pass this class. I help him notice you exist." He finally looked up. "Scratch my back, I scratch yours." She wanted to say no, she had the word loaded and ready, but something about the way he said it, not cruel, not smug, just practical, like he'd thought it through and this was simply the most efficient path for both of them, made her hesitate long enough for the silence to become an answer he could work with. "I'm not doing this for free," she finally said. "I said I'd help you with Vincent. That's the price. Not money. Him." She wiped her hands on her apron, buying herself a second. And if you waste my time, I'm done. No second chances. Deal, he said, and stuck his hand out again. This time, she shook it. The first session happened at the hockey house on Chandler Street. A big, rundown Victorian that 4 guys split between them, cluttered with gear bags and pizza boxes and a couch that had seen better decades. Ashley stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds before she made herself walk in. You live like this? We live like college students, Jae-hyun said, clearing a stack of mail off the kitchen table. There's a difference. She sat, pulled out her notes, and got straight to work. Because if she let this feel casual for even a second, it would stop being a transaction and start being something else. And she wasn't interested in something else. Opportunity cost, she said, sliding a paper toward him. Explain it to me like I've never heard the phrase. He stared at it for a long moment. It's what you give up to get something else. Good. Now do it in a sentence that isn't a definition you memorized. He laughed, short and surprised. Nobody's ever asked me to do that. That's probably why you failed twice. He didn't get defensive. He just sat with it, actually sat with it, chewing on the question until an answer came out in his own words. Clumsy, but real. She nodded. There. That's the one you'll remember. Weeks folded into each other like that. Library tables, the kitchen at Chandler Street, once a booth at a diner off campus when both places were too loud. He was smarter than his transcript suggested. Not the kind of smart that memorizes, the kind that connects things once somebody bothers to explain it in a language that isn't a textbook. He just hated the class, hated economics generally, had only ever wanted a rink and nothing else. And it took Ashley a while to understand that his failing grades weren't laziness. They were a small, quiet rebellion against a life that had been decided for him before he could talk. Word got around campus the way it always does. Somebody saw them at the diner. Somebody else saw them walking back from the library at 10 at night. By week 5, people had already decided they were dating, and neither of them corrected it out loud, because correcting it out loud defeated the entire point of the arrangement. Vincent Parker noticed. Of course he noticed. Nothing got Vincent's attention faster than someone else's attention. He caught her after theory class, leaning against the wall like he'd rehearsed the angle. Didn't know you were seeing Yoon. Word travels. I always thought you were interesting, he said. Guess I should have said something sooner. She smiled at him, the smile she'd practiced in her head for over a year, and it landed exactly the way she used to imagine it would. And still, walking away, she felt strangely little. It was 2 weeks after that when Jaehyun's father showed up. Ashley was at Chandler Street when the black car pulled up outside, and Jaehyun's whole posture changed the second he saw it through the window. Spine straight, jaw tight, the easy version of him folding itself away in half a second. You should go, he said quietly. Jaehyun, please. She didn't leave. She went into the kitchen instead, close enough to hear, far enough to pretend she wasn't listening. His father's voice was calm. That was the worst part. No shouting. Just a flat, surgical tone that cut worse than yelling could have. Your GPA is an embarrassment. Do you understand what happens if you lose eligibility? Do you understand what the trust requires? I'm working on it. You've been working on it for 3 years. Your grandmother's foolishness is the only reason anyone still believes in your discipline. I don't share her patience. Ashley didn't understand the grandmother comment yet. What she understood clearly was the silence after. The sound of a man being dismantled quietly in his own kitchen, agreeing to things just to make the visit end faster. The car pulled away 20 minutes later. Jaehyun came into the kitchen like nothing had happened, reaching for his textbook. Where were we? Jaehyun. Opportunity cost, he said, like she hadn't heard a word of it. Let's keep going. She let him have it. She understood, more than most people would, the particular exhaustion of pretending you're fine directly after you weren't. That night, walking her home, he was quieter than usual, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in front of him. You don't have to tell me anything, she said. I know. I'm just saying. Whatever that was, you don't owe me an explanation. He looked at her sideways. Why do you do that? Do what? Give people an out before they even ask for one. She didn't have an answer for that, not one she was ready to give him, so she just shrugged and kept walking, and he let it drop. And that was the first time either of them realized how much they'd started paying attention to each other without meaning to. It happened on a Wednesday, 10 weeks in, at Chandler Street, past 11 at night. She was hunched over his notes at the kitchen table when one of his teammates came up behind her, laughing about something on his phone, and dropped a hand on her shoulder to show her the screen. It wasn't anything, a joke. A normal, thoughtless touch between people who'd been living in the same house all semester. Ashley's whole body locked. Her breath caught somewhere high in her chest and wouldn't come back down, and for a second, she wasn't in that kitchen anymore. She was 17 again, back in a house in another state, and her hands started shaking before she even understood why. Jaehyun was up out of his chair before anyone else registered what was happening. "Everybody out," he said, not loud, just final. "What I do. Out. Now." The kitchen emptied. He didn't touch her. He just sat back down across from her, close enough that she'd know he was there, far enough that she had room to breathe. "You're okay," he said quietly. "Nobody's going to touch you. Just breathe." It took almost 5 minutes for her hands to stop shaking. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't fill the silence with questions the way people usually did, hungry for an explanation they could feel sorry about. He just waited, and that patience was the first thing that made her trust him completely. "His name was Sean," she finally said. Not his real name, a name she still used sometimes, when it was easier than the real one. "High school. A party. I told people afterward, and he made sure nobody believed me before I could even finish the sentence." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I left the state for college partly because of him, partly because I couldn't stand walking through those hallways anymore." "I'm sorry," he said, and didn't try to say anything else. Didn't try to fix it. Didn't perform sympathy he hadn't earned yet. "You're not going to ask if I'm okay? I already know you're not, all the time. I think you've just gotten really good at being okay anyway." He looked at her. "That's not weakness. Whatever you think it is, it's the opposite." She hadn't told Crystal any of this. 2 years living together, and Crystal knew Ashley didn't date, knew she flinched sometimes, had chalked it up to personality without ever getting the real story, and here was a boy she'd known for 10 weeks who now knew more about her than her own best friend. That should have scared her. It did, a little. But mostly it felt like putting something down she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it had weight. 2 nights later, Vincent finally asked her to dinner. She said yes. It felt like closing a loop she'd been circling for over a year, and she wanted to know, once and for all, if the feeling had been real or just a habit she'd built out of boredom and distance. Dinner answered the question fast. Vincent talked for most of it. About his recital, about a professor who didn't understand his artistic instincts, about a composition program he was applying to that he was certain he'd get into. When she mentioned her cafe job, he made a face like she'd said something faintly embarrassing. When she brought up her own composition work, he cut in halfway through to compare it to his. She sat there, polite, nodding, and realized somewhere between the appetizer and the check that she was comparing every single thing he said to how Jaehyun would have responded. And Jaehyun kept winning, every time, without even being in the room. She walked home alone that night, cold air doing nothing to clear her head, and admitted to herself, quietly, that the crush she'd built her whole plan around had turned out to be smaller than the thing she'd stumbled into instead. She didn't tell Jaehyun any of that yet. She wasn't ready to say it out loud, not even to herself in full sentences, but the next tutoring session she caught herself laughing at something he said longer than the joke deserved, and she caught him watching her do it, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them noticed. Word about the dinner reached the team before Ashley even got home that night, twisted into something uglier by the time it landed. One of Jaehyun's teammates, Grant, had been on thin ice with the coaching staff all season over his own grades, and it burned him seeing Jaehyun's eligibility saved while his own hung in the balance. He didn't know the real story. He didn't care to. By Friday, the version going around campus was that Ashley was being paid to tutor Jaehyun and pretend to date him, dressed up as some kind of arrangement between a rich hockey player and a broke music major cashing in. It moved through group chats fast, the way ugly things always do, faster than anything true ever travels. Crystal heard it before Ashley could explain it herself. "Is it true?" Crystal asked, standing in their kitchen with her coat still on, like she hadn't even taken time to sit down before asking. "It's not what people think. That's not what I asked. Is there an arrangement? Were you ever going to tell me, or was I just supposed to find out from a group chat?" Ashley didn't have a clean answer. The truth was tangled up with things she hadn't told Crystal either, and untangling one meant untangling both. And she wasn't ready. It's complicated. We live together. We've lived together for 3 years. I think I've earned complicated. It was the first real fracture in a friendship that had never had one. And it hurt worse than Ashley expected. Because Crystal wasn't wrong. She'd built a life around telling people just enough to keep them close and not 1 inch more. And now the two people who'd gotten past that wall, Jae-hyun and Crystal, were on opposite sides of a mess that made both of them feel lied to. Jae-hyun found out about the rumor the same night, at a team dinner, from Grant himself, said loud enough for half the table to hear. "So how much is she charging you, man? Heard it's a package deal." The room went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet before something happens. Jae-hyun didn't raise his voice. He set his fork down, looked at Grant, and said it plain. "Whatever it started as, it's not that anymore. I'm not going to sit here and let you talk about her like she's a transaction." He looked around the table. "In case anyone else is confused, this isn't fake. Not to me." It was the truest thing he'd said out loud in weeks, and it happened in a room Ashley wasn't in, which meant she found out about it the way she found out everything lately. Secondhand, already shaped by someone else's telling. She didn't know how to feel about it. Relieved, a little, terrified, more. That same week, his father returned. And this time, it wasn't a quiet kitchen conversation. It was an ultimatum delivered over the phone while Jae-hyun sat in his room with Ashley across from him, close enough to hear both sides. "Your GPA needs to reflect a real degree by the end of this semester," his father said, voice flat and final. "Not eligibility, a real average. Or, the trust moves to your cousin. I've already had the paperwork drafted." Jae-hyun hung up without arguing, and for a long moment just sat there, staring at nothing. "He's serious," Ashley said quietly. "He's always serious." Jae-hyun rubbed his hands over his face. "He thinks that trust is the only thing keeping me tied to this family, that I'd fall apart without it. Would you?" He was quiet for a while. Then he said something she wasn't expecting. "There's another trust. My grandmother set it up before she died, in my name, separate from anything my father controls. He doesn't know it exists." He looked at Ashley like he was testing whether she'd understand the weight of what he was saying. "She never trusted him with money, said he'd use it as a leash. She wanted me to have something he couldn't touch. So you don't actually need his money?" "No! Then why do you keep fighting so hard for his approval?" The question sat there, and he didn't answer it right away, because the truth was uncomfortable. That money had never been the thing he wanted from his father, and no trust, hidden or not, was ever going to fix that particular hole. The showcase was scheduled for the second week of April, the one game every scout in the region would be watching, the kind of night that decided whether a college career turned into a professional one. It landed, without warning, on the exact same evening as Ashley's junior recital, the first time she'd be performing an original composition in front of an audience instead of a professor. Her mother called 2 days before to cancel. "Work conflict," she said, apologetic in the distracted way she always was, promising to catch the next one. Ashley said it was fine. It wasn't, but she'd had a lot of practice saying that word about things that weren't. She didn't ask Jae-hyun to choose. She wouldn't have, even if she'd let herself want it. He showed up anyway. At the recital hall, in a jacket that wasn't his hockey gear, sitting 3 rows back where she could see him from the stage without looking like she was looking for him. She found out afterward what it cost. The scouts had been there specifically to watch him, and his empty seat had been noticed, commented on, filed away as a red flag by exactly the kind of people who decide these things. His father had been in the stands too, watching the space where his son should have been. "You shouldn't have come," she told him after, backstage, still in her performance dress. Adrenaline not yet drained out of her hands. "I wanted to. Your whole future was in that arena tonight. My whole future was also in this building tonight," he said. "I picked the one that mattered more." She wanted to argue with him, and instead she just stood there, overwhelmed by a feeling she didn't have a clean name for yet, something between gratitude and fear, because if he was willing to give up that much for her, what exactly was she supposed to do with that? 2 days later, panic caught up with her the way it always did, late and all at once. She found him at Chandler Street and told him it was over. Not just the fake dating, All of it. I can't be the reason you lose your future, she said. You gave up the showcase. Do you understand what that means? I won't let this cost you everything. You're not costing me anything. Jaehyun, you're scared, he said, cutting through it plainly. That's what this is. You're not protecting me. You're protecting yourself, the way you've been doing since before I even met you. His voice wasn't angry, just steady, unwilling to let her have the easy exit. I'm not going anywhere just because you're scared of what happens if I stay. She didn't have a response for that. Nobody had ever refused to let her run before. I've never let anyone in like this, she admitted, quiet, the fight going out of her voice. Not since him, not since high school. I know. What if I'm not built for this? You already are, he said. You just don't believe it yet. She stood there in that cluttered kitchen, in a house that had started to feel like the safest place on campus, and for the first time in 3 years, let herself consider that maybe survival wasn't the only thing she was capable of. Maybe there was room for this too. Word of the recital reached Jaehyun's father, filtered, second-hand, softened by whoever delivered it. A teammate's father, who'd been at the showcase, mentioned to him afterward that the whole team had noticed Jaehyun's absence, and when pressed on why, someone had let it slip that it was a recital. A girl, something about a piano. His father didn't say anything about it for 4 days. Then, on a Sunday, he called. I watched a video, his father said. No greeting, no preamble. Someone had recorded part of the performance, and it had made its way through a group chat until it found him. Jaehyun braced for the lecture. I know what the showcase cost me. I don't need you to remind me. That wasn't why I called. A pause. Long enough that Jaehyun almost checked if the line had dropped. She's talented. That was all. No apology, no warmth exactly, but it was the first time in years his father had said something about Jaehyun's life that wasn't a correction. Ashley finally told Crystal everything. Not the edited version, not the version built to keep people comfortably at a distance, all of it. High school. The boy she still sometimes called Sean because the real name still caught in her throat. Why she left the state. Why the tutoring arrangement had felt impossible to explain honestly without unraveling a story she'd spent years keeping sealed. Crystal sat with it for a long moment, arms crossed. Not out of anger this time, out of something closer to grief on Ashley's behalf. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because if I told you, it would be real, and I didn't want it to be real anymore. I wanted it to be something that happened to someone else. I would have believed you. I know that now. They talked for hours that night, the kind of conversation that repairs something instead of just patching it, and by the end, Crystal wasn't angry anymore. Just sorry she hadn't known sooner. Sorry Ashley had carried it alone for so long in a 2-bedroom apartment, where someone had been right there the whole time. Jaehyun's grades came in 2 weeks later. Not perfect, but real. A passing average that would hold up under any scrutiny his father wanted to throw at it, earned the slow way. One badly explained concept turned into one clumsy sentence at a time until it stopped being clumsy. His father flew back for graduation planning, and this time the conversation in the kitchen at Chandler Street was different. Still stiff, still a man who didn't know how to soften easily after a lifetime of not needing to. But he asked about her, asked her name, actually used it, which was new. Ashley, Jaehyun said. She's the reason I passed. I gathered that. I'm not doing this for the trust anymore, Jaehyun said, and this was the moment he'd been circling for weeks, working up to without knowing it. I need you to know that, whatever happens with the money, whatever you decide, I'm not fighting for it because I need it. His father's jaw tightened, the old defensiveness rising. Then why fight for it at all? Jaehyun took a breath. Because I wanted you to want me to have it. That was never about the money. It was always just that. His father didn't answer right away. He stood there in that cramped kitchen, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man being asked a question he'd never once prepared for in his life. Grandmother left me a trust before she died, Jaehyun said, deciding, finally, to say it out loud. Separate from yours. You never knew about it. I could walk away from everything you control tomorrow and be completely fine. Something shifted in his father's face. The specific sting of realizing your own mother hadn't trusted you, and had been right not to. She never said anything to me, his father said quietly. She wasn't trying to hurt you. She was trying to protect me. From you needing to be needed. Jaehyun's voice stayed calm, steady, the same steadiness he'd used with Ashley in that kitchen weeks before. I've spent 3 years trying to earn something from you that was never actually about grades or eligibility or a trust fund. I just wanted you to be proud of me without a spreadsheet attached to it. His father sat down at the table, which was, in its own small way, more of an admission than anything he could have said out loud. I don't know how to do that, he said finally. I was only ever taught how to measure things. I know, Jaehyun said. I'm not asking you to fix it tonight. I'm just done pretending the money was ever the point. It wasn't a resolution wrapped in a bow. His father didn't cry, didn't apologize outright, didn't turn into a different man in one conversation. But he stayed at that table for another hour asking real questions for the first time in years. About the class Jaehyun had struggled with, about Ashley, about what came after graduation, and for a man who'd spent his whole life measuring, that was its own kind of beginning. Ashley and Jaehyun spent that same week the way normal couples spend weeks, studying together without the excuse of tutoring, walking to the diner because they wanted to, not because it was strategic. Vincent had already moved on, dating a sophomore in the theater program, and Ashley found she didn't feel anything about it at all, which told her everything she needed to know about what that crush had actually been. Crystal, healed and curious now instead of hurt, sat the two of them down over dinner one night and asked, half joking, "So when did the fake part actually end?" Jaehyun looked at Ashley. Ashley looked back at him. Honestly, Ashley said, I don't think there was a single moment. I think it just stopped being fake a little more every week, until one day it wasn't fake at all. That's annoyingly poetic for someone who used to yell at him in a hallway. I never yelled. You definitely yelled. Jaehyun grinned. She did. I remember it clearly. Best thing that ever happened to me. Graduation came at the end of May, 3 months to the day since that first tutoring session at the cafe counter, though neither of them had been counting until Crystal pointed it out one night, doing the math out loud like it was a fun fact instead of the whole architecture of their year. Ashley's recital piece had been picked up by the department for the spring showcase, performed one more time in front of a full auditorium, this time with her mother in the audience, and Jaehyun in the front row exactly where he'd been the first time. Except now, everyone in that room knew exactly who he was there for. Before she walked out to play, she stood backstage for a second, hands steady, breath even, nothing like the version of herself who used to flinch at a hand on her shoulder. You okay? Jaehyun asked, finding her there. Better than okay, she looked at him. 3 months ago, I didn't like you at all. I remember you made that very clear. I didn't think I had room for anyone. I thought I'd used it all up just surviving. She reached for his hand. Turns out I had more room than I knew. I just needed someone patient enough to wait for me to find it. He didn't say anything dramatic back. He just squeezed her hand once, let her go when the stage manager called her name, and watched her walk out into the light. She sat at the piano, found her mother's face in the crowd, found Jaehyun's right beside it, and before she played a single note, she leaned toward the microphone. This one's dedicated to the first person who ever waited instead of pushing, she said. You know who you are. Then she played, and the room went completely still, and somewhere in the third row, a boy who used to fail economics and run from anything that asked him to stay, sat with his hands folded in his lap and understood, without a single doubt left in him, exactly who that song belonged to. If you made it all the way to the end of this one, thank you for sticking with Ashley and Jaehyun's story. It means a lot. If you loved it, drop a like, leave a comment telling me your favorite part, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.